My name is Travis Sawihatis. I am a board member at the Community-Based Research Centre. I also work at the BC Centre for Disease Control, and I have the pleasure of moderating the next session, which is about rethinking risk and resilience. We have three very dynamic speakers with, who are going to share some of their reflections on this topic. We're going to have about 20 minutes for each speaker. So our first presenter is Dr. Barry Adam, and I think most people know him, but for those who don't, I'll tell you a bit about Barry. Barry Adam is University Professor of Sociology at the University of Windsor and Senior Scientist and Director of Prevention Research at the Ontario HIV Treatment Network. Coming to HIV work with an extensive research record on the dynamics of domination and empowerment, LGBT studies, HIV prevention, and issues of living with HIV. Some of his current projects engage community-based research to investigate HIV prevention and sexual health programming for HIV-positive men, HIV vulnerability among trans men and among Spanish and Portuguese-speaking men, and health resilience. He also leads a multidisciplinary collaborative partnership combining molecular epidemiology, sociology, and clinical practice to bring multiple tools to bear on advancing HIV prevention. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Adam.
All right, so this first slide's just an excerpt from the call that we all got for this workshop on Beyond Behaviours. It struck me as an important challenge to think about how to deal with or conceptualize gay men's sexual health in a way that moves beyond the biomedical individualist model. And I've been a critic of that model as well. And I think it's the discontent with that kind of pathologizing rhetoric that has led to the resilience turn. And of course, I expect most of you are familiar with resilience talk, where we're trying to think about how to glean narratives of successful coping or of surviving and thriving or of overcoming challenges that could potentially be more helpful in figuring out how to enhance gay men's sexual health, and simply focusing always on what is apparently pathological indicators. And I've tried to be part of this kind of dialogue for a long time too, in that I've done work before in the gay and lesbian movement, which of course is trying to think about how to improve the status of LGBT people, and in a work that was published as a book called Experiencing HIV, which was intended to contribute to the culture of HIV positive people to think about how to have to deal with often the social consequences and get a better quality of life in societies which stigmatize HIV. And I'm currently involved in research with Trevor on a protective factors study to look at resilience among gay men, and another with Alan Lee on pathways to resiliency. Now you're going to see why I make this self-referential remark, and that is I continue to struggle actually with this dichotomy between looking at both sides of the question of what are the predictors of risk and the resilience turn, because I think it's not that easy to do. It's easier to say than to accomplish. And the results of the study I'm going to be talking about today from the new Sero-Converters study really puts me in the midst of the challenge that's posed by this workshop today, and I don't have easy answers, and will be appealing to you to help me think through some of these results. So this new Sero-Converters study, so far we've done 43 interviews with new Sero-Converters, which means that not only have they tested positive within the year, but according to virological analysis, they actually were indeed infected within the year. And these people are drawn from 2 downtown Toronto clinics that have the highest testing rates for HIV. It's open by gender, but in fact, everyone who's turned up in our study so far has been male. Probably has to do with the fact that these clinics are located in the Church Wellesley neighborhood. Most are gay, some bisexual, one heterosexual man, average age is 32, a variety of relationship statuses, and a range of educational statuses as well, from 8 who have high school or less education to 22 who have university, BA or beyond level of education. And it's a very multi-ethnic group, really similar to the population in Toronto in general. We've got, representation from all the major ethnic groups. Now, I'm mentioning this Demyx hypothesis here, but this study actually didn't set out to test syndemics. It actually is a phylogenetic study that was intended to look at the social networks of people. So far, we don't have enough results from that side of the study to report today, but this is the first preliminary report that I'm doing from this study at all to any audience. And one of the hypotheses that we did want to check out with the new Sero-Converters was the Demyx hypothesis. Most of you, I expect, are familiar with it, but this is the quote from the original 2003 Ron Stahl and colleagues article that defines what it is. And of course, they suggest that there is an intersection of 3 or 4 rather epidemics in their terms of childhood sexual abuse, depression, polydrug use, and partner violence that places men at particular risk of HIV seroconversion. And obviously they have a number of other health issues as well. So we decided to check that hypothesis out as well and use these questions in a preliminary survey or quantitative, checkoff list that the interview subjects filled out before they were interviewed. And we used these abuse questions, which are a kind of whittled down version of some longer scales in the area. So we asked if they had experienced, before the age of 16, name-calling or hateful treatment by their family, being hit hard enough by an adult that they were bruised or had to go to a doctor, unwanted sexual contact by an adult, lack of food, shelter, clothing, safety, or health care, or demeaning or humiliating treatment because an adult thought that they might be gay. And here's our preliminary result from the 43, and I'll talk about this. I'll explain these quadrants. The one on the right, which is kind of a slate blue, I guess, we found that 14 of the interviewees did check off 2 or more of the questions on the abuse scale, that they had sometimes, often, or very often experienced abuse, and that those same 14 had recent use of 2 or more club drugs, namely ketamine, GHB, MDMA, or crystal meth, and or cocaine. So you might say they're candidates for the Ron Stahl hypothesis here. In fact, there were more than we were expecting, quite frankly, to see. So that's 14 out of 34, quite a pretty big piece of the set of people we interviewed, the set of men. And then the purple color are those who reported abuse but not drug use, or didn't meet the threshold of drug use. And the orange one is the opposite. That is, they reported drug use but not abuse, and then 17 in the other category. So you can see I'm kind of in the middle of it in terms of the original contrast between pathology and resilience. Because the question I guess I have here is, once we have that result, now what do I do with it, right? How do I make sense of it in a way that moves us forward, that might enhance the sexual health of gay men? So I want to give you a little bit of a feel for what men in these various quadrants said in interview, and I'm hoping this is legible without having to read the whole thing out. Is it I know it's kind of awful to shut out the Vancouver sun in order to see the screen, and it's a long room. But here's an example then. I'm starting off with the men who are in that quadrant where they show both drug use and abuse. And this is an excerpt in his own words, which kind of classic, I guess, in terms of what Stahl's talking about, where he says, I'm always moody, I'm always depressed. Then he lists a number of drugs that he's been taking, says, I know it's a lot, and makes some references as well to a family background that was fairly involved with drugs and alcohol as well. Crystal meth turns up in a number of these narratives. So here's another excerpt. And the respondent says, I don't want to say I didn't care about myself or something like that, because it's not true. But we continually had unsafe sex. We also had rules and stuff like that with others. So then we're supposed to be safe about other people. Turned out not true, because he was using meth. So as well as this person being fairly heavily involved in using club drugs, then his partner was as well. And then the other line at the bottom is just a fairly simple statement about the interviewee attributing his own risk to when he was on crystal. Now, so that I offer those two excerpts, first of all, to let you know that the involvement we see in interviews in drug use is beyond casual. It's pretty extensive. And then when we move to some of the other quadrants, and this is an example of someone who checks off the drugs but not the abuse questions, the narrative isn't that different, but there are some nuances here. So the respondent says, I came here, and he mentions a Latin American country, and is quite eloquent, I think, as it goes through the interview, talking about some of the challenges he was facing. So he became involved in taking a number of these drugs, and he says, when I got infected, I was really feeling very lonely, and I got in this sexual addiction, I think, combined with crystal and just having sex with different guys. I was not feeling any connection with anybody, and then talks about really his, a lot of his sexual behavior was ways of trying to get that sense of connection, get a sense of community, get a sense of support. And he mentions taking crystal and says, so I experienced being attractive and having all this success with these guys, and like being in this drug thing and having a lot of sex and just checking my list of all the hottest guys I have, like, you know, and validating myself, I think. It gives some insight, I guess, into the feel of what goes on behind a lot of the numbers, since one of the oldest correlations in HIV studies is that correlation between drug use and HIV risk. But here I think we get a little bit of insight into how that all works together, and how drugs are filling a particular kind of, or I guess solving a certain problem or filling a certain niche in his life as he was dealing with a number of issues of trying to make connection in Canadian society. So here's someone else who's one step removed from the syndemics quadrant, but again, you can see some continuity with the other men. Now, the reason that he's removed is he doesn't report enough drugs to meet the criterion, but he's still fairly involved, and it gives quite a a lengthy narrative here about how he felt about his involvement with club drugs. In his phrase, your brain gets diluted. You start looking at the world very differently. You start looking at yourself differently. You start not caring. You lose these sort of things. It's almost like you put yourself in situations to try to harm yourself. And if you get down to the end of the excerpt, you see that he was pretty seriously involved and got caught up in the criminal justice system as well. So now I guess they're Olivier's words in the mail come to haunt me because this notion of the pathological gay man with reckless sex and illicit drug use and so on arises out of the material in a way that I wasn't quite anticipating, wasn't really my intent. But these are their words, right? That's how they understand their own context in the situations of risk-taking and in this instance of seroconversion as well. So it poses challenges to me. How do we acknowledge drug use that is pleasurable, recreational, not harmful? Kane Race poses that challenge in his book, Pleasure Community, Consuming Medicine. But also at the same time recognizing that it can be painful, isolating, dangerous, or out of control. And a number of these men talk about that in their own lives. And ultimately, how do we contribute to a culture of practice to enhance the health of our communities? So I want to give you a sense as well, okay, of the other quadrant of those who are not, don't fit the syndemics profile and you know, don't report abuse and so on. So here's a different kind of story, and this is from a man I interviewed who came fairly recently out of heterosexual marriage. This becomes a story about relationship dynamics. And again, this is a bit of one of the oldest stories in HIV studies about the situations in which risk arrives. And it gives a little bit of insight into a number of these risk reduction strategies, which are often dealt with, I think, fairly abstractly in the literature and not very well contextualized. But here you can see that he says that he developed a negotiated safety with his partner, but it all unraveled. So he says that he found out that his partner wasn't keeping up his end of the bargain. And there's also a travel theme, for what it's worth. Several people talk about acting differently on vacation and taking more risks and perhaps seroconverting because of that. So there's a little bit of literature on this notion of escape, and that travel might be a moment when people kind of suspend the rules of their normal lives. So one mentions Mexico, another New York. And there's others, and one always has to acknowledge, I think this strikes anyone who does interviews in these areas, that ultimately people are producing narratives about their lives, and sometimes they can't actually. The main narrative is, I don't know. And some of them say that. In a couple of instances, they're really unclear about what the risk situation may have been. But the last one is also really an outlier in that he talks about being sexually assaulted. So that, you know, again, quite a different thing, but it just, again, points to the diversity of possible contexts. So where I want to end up then is with this question that's posed by the mandate of this workshop, which is how do we talk about and deal with behaviors which are problematic, but at the same time, are there ways that we can think that would, I guess, assist men to move to a place which where they might be happier and where they may be less at risk. So to me, it raises questions about how we enhance the health of our communities, including reducing HIV transmission. How do we address endemics? Can we document and promote a culture of resilience? But how also do we face trauma, trouble, and turmoil, which is there? Not to affirm yet another construction of the pathological gay man, but to find pathways to a better quality of life. And ultimately, this is my last slide, is all this caused me to think about a larger social context in which this all occurs and other kinds of resonances in the narratives of the men we've interviewed, where LGBT people have of course, made major accomplishments in this country in winning citizenship rights. You know, in the realm of state and law, we've come a long way. But in other areas, there's an intersection with a number of problematic issues which I think can actually reinforce some of the trouble that the men we interviewed talk about. And I'll make reference here to the neoliberal ethic of the marketplace. So this is an argument that the state and corporate sectors often press us in the direction of a neoliberal ethic. This is a good moment to talk about it, as Margaret Thatcher's just died. Since the Reagan-Thatcher revolution is a very important part of creating this vision of the rational, consenting, contract-making individual with no interest or concern in the well-being of a community. She said there is no society. Or care for the vulnerable or relation to unmasculine realms of feeling, which encourages a kind of hyper-individualism, which feeds a sense of isolation and disconnection, which, you know, reverberates through a lot of these narratives. And makes me wonder as well about the larger evolution of gay male sexuality towards app-based sexual consumerism, which is disconnected from other social realms such as work and even the lives we have with friends. It exists off in its own realm, often governed by the norms of the marketplace. This is a larger, harder question. I don't know quite how to deal with it, but in a lot of ways, the guys that we're talking to talk about ways of trying to make their lives through or solve problems that we're all familiar with. You know, this is how a lot of our lives are having to deal with these kinds of questions and issues. And it says something about how the larger society and where the gay male sexual marketplace has arrived historically. So I've kind of presented a number of questions or dilemmas. It's also part of a study that, to pick up on the last presentation, does try to see if we can identify an end of our community or subgroups of gay men who are more at risk or more vulnerable and through which the virus is moving more rapidly. I think it's pretty clear that it is among these men and that Stahl was onto something. But I think it then poses a question to us of, so how do we deal with this? It's obviously way more complicated than saying, like, take crystal meth away and then it's all solved. You know, it's not all solved. It's, right, that's just a kind of evident symptom of a larger set of things that are all going on together. So, thanks.